everyone. Today we're going to be talking about decimals. We're going to first start with decimal division. But before we even get into the division, there's some vocabulary that I want to make sure that we go over. The first word we're going to be looking at today is going to be dividend, and that's the number that's being divided. The second vocab word we're going to be looking at is divisor, and that's the number that's dividing the other number. And lastly, we're going to see quotient, which is the result or the answer when one number is divided by another. So we've seen division three ways: as a fraction, with our division house, and with our division symbol. Notice where the dividend, divisor, and quotient is in each. Now that we've got our vocab down, let's actually look at how to divide. So there's two kinds of division that we're going to be looking at first. When we divide decimals with whole number divisors and when we have decimals without whole number divisors. So in our first case, whole number divisors. When we have those whole number divisors, it tells us to divide a number by a whole number, place the decimal point directly above the decimal point in the dividend, and divide as though dividing by a whole number. So we're going to look at our first two examples. The first example is 379.2 divided by 8. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and rewrite that just like I would a regular long division problem. So 379.2 divided by 8. So our first step tells us to place the decimal point directly above where it is in the dividend. So I just went ahead and did that. And now we're going to divide as normal. 8 goes into 37 4 times. That gives us 32. We're going to subtract, bring down that 9. 8 into 59 is 7. That's going to give us a 56. 59 minus 56 is 3. We're going to go ahead and bring down that 2. 8 into 32 is 4. So our answer when we divide 379.2 divided by 8 is going to be 47.4. Pretty easy? All right, let's look at our second example. We have 82.08 divided by 24. So again, we're going to go ahead and rewrite that as a regular long division problem. Going by our steps, our first step is again, place the decimal point directly above the decimal point in the dividend. So here's our decimal point in the dividend, and I'm going to place it directly above it. And then we're going to divide as normal. So 24 will go into 82 3 times. That's going to give us 72. When we subtract that, we'll get 10. I'm going to go ahead and bring down that 0. That's going to give us 100. 24 into 100 will go 4 times. 4 times 24 is 96. 100 minus 96 is 4. We're going to bring down that 8 that's remaining, and 24 goes into 48 2 times. We're finished. There's nothing else to bring down. Therefore, our answer when we divide 82.08 by 24 is going to be 3.42. Now we have to ask ourselves, what happens if we don't just end our problem like we did on the last ones with no remainder? Well, we have to remember that we can always add zeros after the last digit in the decimal portion of a number. For instance, if we have the number 3.60, we can have 3.600, 3.6000, or 3.6000000, and so on and so on and so on. So we're going to see what happens in this next example. We have 30 divided by 8. Two whole numbers. We should feel comfortable dividing these. Again, we remember that when we don't see our decimal, it's unwritten and it's going to be at the end of that dividend. So I'm going to bring it up just like our first step says. And then we're going to divide like normal. 8 goes into 30 3 times. That's going to give us 24. When we subtract 30 minus 24, we do get 6. At this point, I don't have any other numbers in my dividend. But again, we can add zeros. So I'm going to go ahead and just add 1 0. We'll see what happens after this point. And I'm going to bring it down. 8 goes into 60 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56. And we have a 4. Again, we can add as many zeros as we like, so I'm going to extend this, add one more 0, and bring it down, and we'll go ahead and see what happens after this point. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 we know is 40, and 40 subtract 40 finally gives us that remainder of 0. So we can stop right there. So that one wasn't too terrible. Let's look at our last example. We have 4.5 divided by 25. So again, we're going to rewrite this. And we're going to follow our rules. I have to move my decimal point up, as step 1 asked us to do. And now we're going to go ahead and divide. On this case, 25 won't go into 4, or it will go in 0 times. I'm actually going to place that 0 there just so I have a placeholder. 0 times 25 is 0. 4 minus 0 is 4. I'm going to go ahead and bring down that 5. 25 goes into 45 one time. 1 times 25 we know is going to be 25. 45 minus 25 is going to be 20. We don't have any zeros, but we just saw in our little note that we can add as many zeros as we'd like. So I'm going to go ahead and start by adding 1 0 and bringing it down. 25 goes into 200 8 times, and 8 times 25 is exactly 200. So when we go ahead and subtract those two, we do see that we have that remainder of 0. Well, we saw what happens when we have divisors that are whole numbers, but what happens in our second case when we have divisors that are not whole numbers? Well, again, we have some steps that we can solve here. Our first step is to move the decimal point to make the divisor a whole number. Once we've done that, we're going to move the decimal point in the dividend the same number of places. Those two are very important steps. And then step 3, place the decimal directly above the new decimal point in the dividend and divide as whole numbers. All right, so let's see what that looks like. We're going to look at our example 5 right here, and we're going to go ahead and divide. So the first thing I want to do is rewrite my problem as long division. And we can see right here in our 8.6 that it does have a decimal point. It is not a whole number divisor. So again, that first step tells us to move the decimal point. So I'm going to move it one place to the right in my divisor. Our second step tells us to move the decimal point the same number of places. So I'm actually going to move it one place in our dividend as well. Just because I like to rewrite, I'm going to go ahead and clean this up a bit and rewrite it as 58.48 divided by 86. Now, step 3 tells us to just place our decimal directly above our dividend in our quotient and then divide like normal. So that's what we're going to do. We know 86 will not go into 58, so I'm going to put my 0 there as a placeholder. We can go ahead and do the math if we'd like. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and bring that 4 down, and 86 will go into 584 6 times, and that's going to give us 516. When we go ahead and subtract that, I'm going to have to borrow from my 8. That becomes a 7. 14 minus 16 is 8. 7 minus 1 is 6. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring down my 8 since I have something else to bring down. 86 will go into 688 8 times. 8 times 6 we know is 48. Carry our 4. 8 times 8 is 64. Plus 4 is 688 exactly. 688 minus 688 is 0, so we don't have to worry about adding extra zeros or any remainders here. Our answer is just going to be 0.68. And let's look at our last example here on number 6. So we have 12 divided by 0.64. Again, we want to go ahead and write that as long division. We notice that our divisor does have a decimal, and according to our first step, we have to move the decimal point 2 places, because then it will no longer be a decimal number in our divisor. Whatever we do to our divisor, we have to do to our dividend. We first must remember that if we don't see the decimal point, it's at the end, and now we can go ahead and move it 2 places. We will have to add those extraneous zeros. Just because I want to go ahead and clean this up a little bit, I'm going to make this 1200. I'll put the decimal there. Divided by 64. We don't need that leading zero anymore since we're now working with a whole number. Step 2 does tell us to bring our decimal point up from our dividend into our quotient, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. 64 goes into 1200 18 times, and 18 times 64 is 1152. We're going to go ahead and subtract that, and we should get 48. Again, we didn't add any zeros to our original problem. I see that I have this remainder of 48, so I now know that I need to add some zeros. So I'm going to start by adding 1 0 and bringing it down. So 64 goes into 48, or 480, excuse me, 7 times. And 7 times 64 is 448. When I subtract that, I'm going to get 32. Since I, again, have a remainder, I will need to add 1 more 0 and bring it down. So 64 will go into 320 5 times, and 5 times 64 is exactly 320. At this point, we know that we will have 0 as a remainder or no remainder, and we're done with our problem. So 12 divided by 0.64 is going to be 18 and 75 hundredths. Heavy division there.